Hey Columbus Road, I hope everybody is doing well. I wanted to hop on and encourage you to sign up for Face-to-Face Ministries. Our goal for the Face-to-Face Ministries is to promote ministry and community in a small group setting. So right now you can register for the Sunday 9 a.m. service, Sunday 11 a.m. service, 412, Celebrate Recovery, Men's Bible Study, and Ladies Bible Study. To register, you're going to head to the Columbus Road website, click on the Bulletin tab, and scroll down to your desired ministry. Click to sign up, fill out the form. After you register, you will get an email with more details. I also wanted to point out the Watch tab on the Columbus Road website. You can listen on demand, watch on demand, and watch live from the website. Also, if you have questions, we are more than happy to answer those for you. That is all, so have a good day.
Welcome to Columbus Road Baptist Church. Everybody please stand and sing. with us as we sing Lead Me to the Cross. Savior, I come, quiet my soul. Remember, redemption's hill, where your blood was spilled for my ransom. Everything I once held dear, I count it all as loss. Lead me to the cross where your love poured out. Bring me to my knees, Lord, I lay me down. Rid me of myself, I belong to you. Oh, lead me to the cross. You were as I, tempted and tried. Human, the Word became flesh for my sin and death. Now you're risen. Everything I once held dear, I count it all as lost. Lead me to the cross where your love poured out. Bring me to my knees, Lord, I lay me down. Rid me of myself, I belong to you. Oh, lead me to the cross where your love poured out. Bring me to my knees, Lord, I lay me down. Rid me of myself, I belong to you. Oh, lead me to the cross. Everybody, thanks for singing with us. Now please be seated.
Good morning, everyone. Those of you at Pittsfield, we want to say a good morning to you. Those that are watching online, and then, as my wife said to me this morning, are you excited? And I said, I am super excited because we have actually a live audience. So everyone that's here, this is my comfort zone. I'm not used to speaking to a camera, though I've become a little bit better at it over the last 12 weeks. I just want to give you a little bit of information moving forward, and that is that we are going to be adding a few services next Sunday. So we have this morning a 9, 11, and then a 5:30 tonight, this evening, and we'll be adding probably 2 more services. So for whatever reason, if you went to the web page and you realized that the services were already populated, no worries. Next Sunday, we're going to start a new normal, and there will be times to meet like no other time before at Columbus Road. So that's one good piece. And if you have a suggestion Like if you want to have a service at 5 a.m., then write it down. I can't make you any guarantees, but I have a friend of mine that wants a 7:30 service in the morning. So Brian or Tom is going to take that service, not me. But anyway, it's so important that we gather together. I'm reminded of in the scriptures where Jesus exhorts his disciples to feed his sheep. It's so critical that we gather together and that our spiritual lives are energized, that we are walking in step with God. And we're going to talk about that a little bit this morning. I want to thank all of the people that are participating in the watch areas. So at Columbus Road, we have, I think, 8 rooms, and they were all pre-signed up, and then the governor changed his order as of Thursday night late, and so we pivoted in a fast way, opened up the auditorium. But I know that you're out there, and I appreciate those in the kids zone. I appreciate those in the common ground that are sitting in a group of 10 going, yeah, and we could be in the auditorium now. So next Sunday, this is the last Sunday, and then we will gather together in a fairly normal fashion. Just want to remind you, if you come to our campuses, that we are going to enforce the social distancing guidelines. So just because we're here does not mean that somehow we're going to violate what we have been recommended and suggested. So just make sure if you come to Columbus Road that you recognize that we are going to be the model of what it's like to be able to protect one another and also submit to the authorities that are above us. We really appreciate the opportunity that we're meeting this morning together, and I think that for the most part, people see how precious it is to gather together, and may we never take for granted, again, the opportunity to gather corporately for worship. So this morning, we are in the second of 6 sermons entitled Flattening the Curve. We're flattening the curve at Columbus Road. The curve we're flattening is simply the misconceptions. We're debunking some of the ideas and opinions that people have about church. And so last week we talked about the whole idea of gathering together is more than just coming and sitting in a church. That forsaking the assembly of yourselves together has much more to do with my attitude and what I'm bringing, that I would express faith and hope and love and encourage my brothers and sisters in Christ. And so it's a participatory activity. We're involved in a family. So we debunk the idea that I just show up for a church service for an hour and then never to connect with another believer through the week and not care and share together with each other in community. This morning, we're going to go down a different road. In fact, the title of the message is Self-Isolation. Self-isolation, you've heard that term over the last 12 weeks quite a bit. And so I want to define it as those that are part of the CDC would define it this morning. Self-isolation is basically a volunteer agreement. This means you are to remain at home and not go to work or school. You'll be expected to limit your movements outside and monitor your health for 14 days. And so one of the things that I want us to do at Columbus Road is to monitor our spiritual health for the next 14 days. See, one of the things that I have heard, I have people coming to my office, is that this 12 weeks has really kind of been difficult for them spiritually. The encouragement that they gain through other believers it has been lost at some degree, and some people are out of the practice of prayer or Bible study. Others have not served really. They've spent most of their time considering what they're going to do next or how their life is going to be impacted from COVID-19. So if you're out there on your couch, if you're in here in this room, if you're in one of our rooms, I want you to do some self-isolation for the next 14 days. I want you to evaluate your spiritual health. Where really am I? And you know what's great is that you may be able to deceive another person. You may be able to act a certain way like you have your spiritual life intact. But the reality is that God already knows where you are. And that's to the topic this morning. We're going to be speaking this morning about prayer. We will discover this morning that church can be a very dangerous place to pray. And I know what you're thinking. You're saying that church is sometimes a dangerous place to pray? Absolutely. It's in human nature for individuals to look and see who's around them, and then to sometimes display or portray themselves in a way that really isn't true or accurate. And so church can be a place where we all come together and we pray. And maybe somebody prays a long prayer, or somebody prays a very intense prayer that sounds like they're so intimately connected and in communion with God. But the reality is that that's not the case. And so we turn to Matthew chapter 6 this morning, and the whole topic of the danger of praying in public and in church is the topic. So I want to ask a question this morning, and as we unpack the next few weeks, one of the things that Pastor Bob is incredibly concerned about, and that's our kids. I believe that we've got a crisis on our hands, and if it isn't already a crisis, it's going to be. And that is the spiritual well-being of those that are in the senior high, junior high, and our children. In fact, many families are going, well, we're hesitating to bring our children to church because of the noise or the inability for them to be attentive. Let me just promise you that we're going to make our services so child-friendly that I don't want that to be a barrier for you. You need to have your kids in church. And so starting next week, we're going to have a children's message. One thing nice about being a guy that has been in church for such a long time is I have watched methodologies come and go and come and go, and now they're coming back in. I remember a day when there was a children's message where that there would be a pastor or someone in the church, they'd bring all the children forward and then they would do an object lesson. That's a part of our plan. The other thing is our services are not going to be 2 hours long. We're aiming right at 1 hour. And the reason we're doing that is because we value this corporate experience. It can't be done at home. There's a level, but it really was never intended or built to be as it is today. And so I want to encourage you there at home, if you have children, bring them. We will make sure that it'll be an interesting hour at the very least, right? We'll all remember it. Remember the COVID church services when we had, and you know what? I would rather us err on that side than err and then find out later that we slipped in our spiritual lives, and then how do you gain that back? We are creating habits that I think in a lot of ways may not be good for us. So this is one thing I want to do this morning. And you can do this right here in the audience, okay? I want you to ask this question to your neighbor beside you or in your seat, and you can talk. When and why do you pray? Okay? So if you're at home, you're on the couch, ask that question. When and why do you pray? If you're in the common ground, ask that question to each other right now. If you're in this room right now, we're going to take 1 minute. When and why do you pray? Go. "30 seconds. When and why do you pray? The audience here became quiet, so they have that answered completely, checked off their list. Here, let me give you a few that you might have included, maybe a few that will stir some thinking later. Do you pray when you're in trouble? I know for me that sometimes that's when I pray, is when I'm up against it. There's crisis. There are people that are praying like they did not pray before because of COVID-19. Some people pray when they're sick or they find someone that they know that's sick. If you have a church prayer list or prayer chain, isn't it interesting that many times those prayer requests are populated by people who are ill? So that's a big thing, people that are ill. Maybe it's a financial concern, a relational concern. Some people pray when they're broke. God, help me out. I need some money. Some people pray when they're desperate, when all else has failed, all of their resources, all of their intellect, everything that they could bring to the table is failing. They're like, now, God, I'm going to pray. I'm desperate. I'm going to pull out the God card. Some people pray at church. They come and they believe that this is the place that they should pray, as if God is in this place more than he's any other place. And so that's been pretty standard over the history of mankind, is that people would come to the temple, people would go to the synagogue, people would go to the church, they would pray. And Jesus in Matthew chapter 6 has some very, very stern warnings as to how we approach prayer when we come together in a corporate manner. How appropriate. So we're going to flatten the curve this morning in terms of prayer. Matthew 6 verses 5 through 8 says this: when you pray. Matthew chapter 6 verses 5 through 8. When you pray, you are not to be like the hypocrites. And so there are people that are watching now that have never been to Columbus Road. I get that. Some of you haven't been in church for forever. And one of the reasons that we talked about last week is the reason you don't go to church is because they're filled with people who are hypocrites. Well, Jesus calls out the hypocrite. Don't be like that person, for they love to stand and pray in the synagogues and on the street corners, so that they may be seen by men. He goes on and says this: truly I say to you, they have their reward in full. But you, when you pray, go into your inner room, close your door, and pray to your Father, who is in secret. And your Father who sees what is done in secret will reward you. Verse 7, and when you are praying, do not use meaningless repetition as the Gentiles do, for they suppose that they will be heard for their many words. So, do not be like them, for your Father knows what you need before you ask. There's just a ton right there in this passage. So we want to break it down. We want to unpack it for you this morning. But I want you to become more than just a hearer. People now can listen to 50 sermons a week. Now people recognize I can go to 4 services on Sunday morning. And though it sounds good, it actually is not a very healthy thing. Because what it does is it makes us become more hearers than doers. We start to somehow process that if I gain more in terms of information, or if I'm fed more, that's going to make me healthy. Well, try that in your own personal physical diet. Start eating 6 and 7 times a day and don't exercise. It won't take too long before it's going to be hard to get off the couch. It's going to be hard to be motivated to do anything. So let me say this, is that as we enter into a new time, a transition time, it's time to get up and actually do and become what God is calling us to do. So he has this huge warning this morning, and I want to just break it down into a big idea, something that everyone can remember. And it's simply this: our prayers are to be personal, private, and sincere. Our prayers are to be personal, private, and sincere. And so there's going to be a huge evaluation that should be taking place this morning, because I'm sure that everyone here prays. If you're watching, if you're listening, you pray. So evaluate your prayers. What are they about? What is the content and what is the attitude? So we see 4 movements in this passage, and the first one we see in verse 5. And simply it's, what is the wrong approach to prayer? So there is a wrong approach that a person can take. He says in verse 5, when you pray, you're not to pray like the hypocrites, for they love to stand and pray in the synagogues and on the street corners, so that they may be seen by men. Truly I say to you, they have their reward in full. As a person that has been in the public for a very long time, I feel like I get this at a very high level. As a coach, as a pastor, I'm seen. I know when people are watching me. And so there's a natural tendency, no matter who that person is, if they stand before people as a school teacher, as an instructor, as an authority figure, as a foreman, as a pastor, there is a natural tendency to recognize that they're being seen. And there's a danger in that. And the danger is what Jesus points out, and that is that it's all about being seen. And so he says, don't be like the hypocrite. Well, the word hypocrite has a whole bunch of origin to it. When you look back into the first century, you recognize that there was theater. There was a time in which people would wear a mask. And I don't want to spend a lot of time really breaking this down because I think most people can capture the idea, is that early on in theater, people would wear masks. Those masks would portray characters. And as those characters would do their theater, they would put on a play and they would represent a particular personality, persona. And so the word hypocrite has this idea of a person who wears a mask. Someone who maybe an individual that's pretending. You could use the word actor. A person who plays a role. And we all know about masks now, don't we? Right? Everybody has a mask on. And so for the first time in our culture, we recognize mask, which is that you really could be frowning and no one would know that unless they could look at your eyes and determine if there's a smile or if there's a frown. There's something that's masked or covered in terms of a person's full face. A hypocrite is hiding something. And so sure, I would easily be able to tell you that churches are filled with hypocrites. In fact, there's very few people that I've ever met that don't have levels of hypocrisy in their life. It's a joke to actually think that we would all be pure and sincere in every motive all the time with every person. It's just not the case. It's not human nature. In fact, it takes a supernatural intervention in the life of a person to remain sincere. Because we have to check our motives in our hearts, not once a week, but regularly. All the time, actually. And so a mask is worn in relationship to this term, hypocrite. Don't be like the hypocrites. And then he cites 3 examples. He talks about people that stand and pray. He talks about people that are in the synagogues. And then he talks about people that are out on the street corner. Well, you need to know a little bit of background, a little bit of Jewish tradition and protocol. Is that the Jew would pray 3 times a day. They would pray in public, 9 o'clock, 12 o'clock, and 3 o'clock. And so you might have a picture in your mind maybe where Muslims at certain points in time in the day, they're going to drop what they're doing and they're going to just pray. Well, that was part of the Jewish tradition. It was part of what they did. In fact, they were very intensely connected to a prayer regiment. Deuteronomy chapter 6 helps us understand even the words that they would use in these prayers that ended up becoming quite repetitious. And so he uses these examples, somebody that would stand and pray. Well, that would happen in the synagogues, and those that were in leadership, those that were leading the temple would stand so everyone could hear them. It would be like a pastor today, where the pastor clears his throat and begins to very skillfully and tactfully address God in such a way that everyone's impressed as if they're best friends, that they are in communion with one another. And certainly that can happen, and a person can be very far away from the Lord. So he warns against the person that's in public, standing. He talks about the person that is going to be in the synagogue where they come to church and that's what they're doing. so that they can be seen. And then on the street corners, it was common for those individuals back in that day and time to drop what they were doing, whether they were at work or in a market, and stop at 12 noon and pray. Well, it's not wrong to pray, and Jesus isn't calling them out for praying. He's going to where he needs to go, where we need to actually hear this morning. That is to the heart of the matter. And I believe that a lot of our prayer lives have suffered during this COVID-19, where we've really lost communion with God, and maybe we've become more desperate in our prayers in terms of, hey, God, just get me out of this. Just fix this, eliminate this. Has there been true communion with God this morning? So the hypocrisy was rooted in the desire to be seen. And so they would recite prayers. Now, I don't know if you've put this together at this point, but I actually this week was kind of chuckling because what we see right after verse 8 is verse 9 through 13, which is the Lord's Prayer. And if you would ask an individual, you would be able to recite that prayer. Many people recite the Lord's Prayer as part of their prayer regiment. It's almost like this. Jesus warns against something that they turn around and immediately do as a group of people. And so today the Lord's Prayer is recited. But how many times maybe have you recited the Lord's Prayer and you were not in communion with God? It was just words. Kind of like the prayer before the meal. The same prayer that you've said for 25 years. That includes about 15 words. With one eye open. One on the food. It's natural for people to cut corners in relationships. And Jesus is saying, don't cut corners in your relationship with me. Your prayers need to be personal. They need to be private. They need to be sincere. And so as we come back together and people will start populating churches again, they'll start to feel a sense of comfort. The warning is that we would not attend to be seen. You don't get a trophy today if you're at church and those that are at home don't get one. It doesn't work like that. It isn't some sort of contest where like the first to do something, they win with God. It has to do with your attitude. It has to do with your heart. And so may I challenge you to, again, take 14 days, the next 14 days, and say, have I slipped back in my spiritual life? Am I in a dry, barren place? Have I replaced it with worry and fear? CNN, Fox TV, Facebook? Have I replaced what's important in my communion with God with something else? The second thing we see is what is the right approach to prayer. But you, when you pray, go into your inner room, close your door, and pray to your Father who is in secret, and your Father who sees what is done in secret will reward you. So, what is prayer? Let's take a moment and think about what is prayer. A simple definition is communion with God. Prayer is communion with God. So there's a connectivity. There's an intimacy. It requires attention, attentiveness. It requires, and I don't know if you've ever thought about this before, it requires some thought beforehand. Have you ever been around somebody and they just, like, when they prayed, it seemed like they were stumbling through the prayer, like as if they'd not talked to God recently, or that they didn't know why they called? They picked up the phone and started calling and talking to God, but they didn't know what the prayer was about. Jesus is instructing us to take it seriously. That there would be a heart preparation. That there would be a sense of what I'm going to say and what I'm saying is truly genuine and sincere. Try this today at lunch. Don't pray for lunch prayer. And you will have people in your house going nuts because they need that 15 seconds of saying something that maybe isn't that sincere. It's just what he's warning against. A ritual, saying some words. I know I had a piece of meat last night. I had not had a piece of meat like that in a long time. And boy, it was, for me, I was truly thankful. Like, how neat, God, that you have provided a way to enjoy food, because simply I had not eaten a piece of meat. It was a steak. It's like, wow, this is really cool. So there was a different level in my prayer, in my appreciation for that. See, if the basic definition of prayer is communion, then God is the center of the prayer and not us. Prayer is a provision given to us by Him. So God has given us an avenue, a pathway, a platform so that we could commune with Almighty God, the one who is sovereign and in control. And when everything is crazy and nuts, there is someone who can speak to all these topics. And it isn't some pastor guy. It is our God who we can commune with, where we can find peace and we can find hope and we can find perspective, and we don't have to worry, we don't have to fret. We actually can have a different response than this world because of the hope that lies within us. So, it has to do with attitude. And being alone with Him reveals motive and sincerity. If you take these 14 days and you get alone with God, what you will find is that your motives and how you're praying and what you're praying will be exposed. It may mean that you're right on line with God. Like, God, that's what I was thinking too. See, for me and COVID, I have a different perspective than a lot of people. It's an opportunity for God's people to respond. With all of the racial tensions we're seeing this weekend, there's a tremendous, unbelievable opportunity for us not to be commentators on it, but actually to have an influence that could change the course of our nation and really evangelism and the gospel for a long time to come. It's a time of purging for the church. Those that are sincerely interested with what God's doing, you know what? They're going to show up and they're going to be a part. There are going to be others that's not going to be the case. And actually, that's a good thing when there is a purifying. Because that's where God works, and that is where revival begins. Is when we're revived, when we recognize what is truly important. So I have a family picture here. And you guys can probably see it in this room, and you can see it on the camera. And what I have is 3 beautiful young ladies that are so happy to be in this picture, this costumed picture. And then I have this guy up here. And that's Matt. And he was like 13 years old. And he was desperately not wanting to be in this picture. Like, if you can see it, I mean, like 3 happy girls in costume. Yeah, we get to dress up and back like in the I don't know, Little House on the Prairie days. And then we have this dude here going, you got to be kidding me. I'm 13 years old. And they're putting me in this picture. And I was thinking this last week as I was preparing for this, sincerity and attitude are not always reflected from the outside. There are many, many family pictures that have been taken where that on the outside you look at the picture and everybody's smiling. They're all together. Only 3 months, 6 months, 9 months later, that picture has no relevance as to what was really taking place. There were problems that were underlying in that family photo, but you didn't see it because there was a insincerity in terms of their facial expressions and how they were really in their hearts and life. And so Jesus is warning us today that there is an approach, and that approach is one that needs to be sincere, and it needs to be with all authenticity. Verse 7, we understand the framework of prayer and sometimes how it can be wrong. And when you are praying, do not use meaningless repetitions as the Gentiles do, for they suppose that they will be heard for their many words. This is kind of easy to explain. It isn't going to take a half hour to do. Is that the Gentiles believed in quantity. That they believed that if they would just do really, really, really long prayers, the more involved their prayers would be, that they would capture God's attention. And when individuals, churches, start to gain a perspective where that their outward performance is somehow merited by God, it leaves an individual in a very bad place, and it leaves a church in a really bad place. Where that people start to perform. It becomes something that's all an outside show. We show up, we do these things, we play this music, and it's really not sincere. It really doesn't capture an attitude of Christ-likeness, but rather it's about the show. And so Jesus is saying, don't be like the Gentiles. Your prayer, if you pray an hour or 10 seconds, is not going to have any sort of difference in terms of connectivity. Rather, it's about your heart. And so what the Jews had done, which I believe happens today, is people gain practices. They capture the practices of other people in methodology. Oh, we better do this now. We better do that now. And as I said earlier in this message, it's cyclical. What comes around goes around, and everybody's trying this new hustle in church. The reality is that prayer is one of those aspects. The framework of that prayer is one that puts the focus back on God. So he warns them, don't be like the Gentiles. Your prayers, if they're long and flowery, will have no better or significance in terms of God listening to them than a child's prayer that says 5 words. And so this is what the practice of the Jews were. Quantity prayers were valued. The longer, the better. So he's still calling out those whose motive was to put on the show. Prayers that draw attention to themselves. So to summarize that, what we could say is that thoughtless prayer is offensive to God. In fact, we all would say that, is if we're having someone that we are speaking with, and there isn't a connectivity where that person may be talking, the other person isn't listening, or that the one person's just babbling on and they're really not saying anything, there's a level of disrespect in that conversation on both parts. And a thoughtless prayer is offensive to God. He desires for us to be sincere. He desires for us to be in communion with Him. So some of us have said the same prayer to God for the last 40 years. It's a ritual. Words that carry no real meaning to us. Saying the same words over and over. Though they may sound personal and polished, our focus is truly on those who are around us. It's convenient, but not appropriate. It's thoughtless. And so the last thing Jesus says is, so do not be like them. For your Father knows what you need before you ask Him. So if you're angered at God, it's quite appropriate to commune in that moment and tell Him. He already knows. If you're frustrated with your situation, well, communion is being able to to tell him, express with sincerity where you're at. Some might think that that would diminish the respect and awe and fear that we would have or are to have with God. But that's a short-sighted view of who he is. Because we recognize through his language that not only did he initiate prayer, but he calls himself Father. And so a father is one that is able to receive not only the praise, but the complaints. I know for me that I want to be the person that answers the needs of my daughters. I don't want some guy out there doing that. I want to be the person that shows and provides the love, the care, the attention, and have all along. A father in his natural, maternal, or paternal, not maternal. Stop, Mark. He has a desire to recognize and to meet needs. God already knows where we're at. He already recognizes the plight, the circumstances, the trials, the struggles we're in. So be sincere. Know what you're going to say and put some thought into it. Because this is where real communion with God begins. It's kind of like there's levels of relationships. There are casual relationships, right? People that you might come in contact at work. And you know of them. You may know their children. You may know a little bit about their background, and you would call them friends, but you're not going to tell them who you really are. You're going to hold back. There are levels of relationship, and when a person becomes open with another person, there's a communion where that they can say difficult things. They can say challenging things. They can express negative feelings and emotions. I don't think that oftentimes we recognize that prayer is the most intimate, personal opportunity to connect with God. And so people don't do that. They do it at a church house. They do it in public. They say the same prayers, and yet there's something missing in the relationship. And I want to challenge you from Jesus' words. He already knows. For the Father knows what you need before you ask him. So prayer is sharing needs, burdens, hunger of the heart before our Heavenly Father, because he wants us to ask. He wants to commune with you. So, prayer is giving God the opportunity to manifest his power, his majesty, and his providence in your life. It's you allowing him to speak into your heart. So we have a lot of things to commune with God about right now, huh? I don't know about you, but there is a huge burden that I sense and feel in this nation. Like our churches should be filled. We should be operationalizing our faith like no other time. And yet, in many ways, we remain silent, and it's not a good moment. We need to be in prayer for our country. We need to be praying that there would be unity, and that the injustices would not be just in terms of social, but rather that we would be addressing the spiritual condition of the hearts of people. That if we all reflected the heart of God, then in our little town or wherever you're at, there would be a tremendous initiative to make things right before there's a blow up or some sort of injustice that leaves us where we're at today. So sometimes we become so passive because we're not communing with God, is that we really don't capture his heart and what his desire for us is. And so in this moment, I would challenge you to get on your knees That you would be communing with God and asking Him, how can I move from being a spectator to a participant? How can I start to be a person of impact in my community? What do you need to initiate? What do you need to do, say, respond, call out? Well, that's going to be a matter of prayer, which is going to take thoughtful attention. We need to quit worrying about our perceived losses and look for God to revive our churches. So most of the conversation I hear relates back to something temporal and something that we're afraid that we're going to lose. When what we're really losing is something that is eternal that we need to grab onto with all of our might, which is our spiritual lives. So, last thing, back page, and by the way, if you want to follow along with Columbus Road Notes, all you have to do is contact the office. We'll send the emails to you, and we'll start loading them, I think, real soon on the webpage in advance. But there's a back page, and there are a couple of challenges that I want to give you. I want to challenge you to take a 14-day monitoring of your spiritual health. There are 4 questions I want you to ask over this 14 days. Number 1, what does my prayer life look like? So this is going to not be a flyover. This is, what does it really look like? Number 2, am I reading my Bible? That's an easy one. That's a yes or no. The vast majority of people that go to church don't read their Bible. It's a fact. The vast majority of people in Western culture don't regularly get into the Word of God and read it. So that would affect your spiritual health. In fact, if you're going to a doctor and they saw a diet that did not include nutrients, they'd say, you're sick, you're in trouble. People who do not read their Bible are in peril spiritually. Number 3, am I expressing my faith? Or am I expressing faith, hope, and love to others? Am I expressing faith, hope, and love to others? Are you the negative Nelly, the worrier of all worriers, and yet you claim to know the God who is the Savior of the world? And number 4, am I reaching out to others? Is this an inward focus? I see people that are, well, you've seen it at the grocery store. 6,000 rolls of toilet paper. Like, we have a mentality to hoard and think about ourselves when times get difficult. Who are you reaching? Who are you touching? Who are you contacting? Remember, we at Columbus Road want to text 2 people. And this week I want to add something. Text 2 people and tell them you're praying for them. I want you to call 2 people and pray with them on the phone. And then I want you to write 2 people and tell them that you're praying for them. And start to share in communion with one another sincerely what's going on. So the big idea this morning was this. Our prayer lives are to be personal. They're to be private, and they're to be sincere. And so that takes thought. That takes attention. That takes time, effort. And as you do this, what I know will happen is that your spiritual health and your attentiveness to what God is doing will raise unbelievably so. And some things that maybe are a little shady, a little bit difficult to understand right now, they'll become clear for you because you're communing with the God of this universe. Well, I challenge you to have a great 14 days as you move forward. Next week, as I told you, we're going to be populating our auditorium several times to include everyone. And so what you'll need to do is simply go on to our webpage. There'll be new opportunities, new times. You click onto that seating section, and then you'll be able to sign up. We have to sign up because we want to make sure that we're following the guidelines. We have to sign up to make sure that we know who's here and are accounted for. We want to be responsible. We want to be respected by those in authority over us, knowing that we're doing everything in our power to be responsible and caring for those not only in our community here at Columbus Road, but the broader community. Have a great day.